Hello guys, David Vose here. Well, it snowed again, and I didn't expect it because it's been warm, but it did get windy, and I could sense that something was battling in the sky to come in and take away the warmth, and the cold air or the Arctic was battling with the warm Gulf Stream air, and it was causing a lot of wind for about 2 or 3 days, but then it snowed last night, and it's still morning or, around noon or something, and all the snow's just about gone again. But I hope you're having a wonderful day. Guys, I don't even know what to do. I don't know what to say. I've just turned this on, and I'm going to describe to you the revelation that I have had yesterday. And yeah, it's a revelation. There ain't no question about that. And it is a correction on some things that I had thought. But it doesn't change any of the narrative. You probably know that I've had some disagreements with some individuals, and publicly we've debated and talked about these things. And one of them is the preterist idea. I never believed in preterism, and I still do not. But what I'm about to share with you is going to probably revolutionize a lot of these individuals who do believe in preterism. And to my good friend Josh, I want to say, Josh, you weren't that far off. In fact, you might be right that the 1,000 years is already passed. What? I know. Oh my goodness. Well, this is going to be a little complicated, but really, once we describe what the real truth about all of this is, it's going to really make a lot of sense, and I think everybody's going to be able to agree. I think we're going to figure out why some of us thought it was a preterism thing that we should believe in. They thought that's how you should interpret the Bible. And others who thought, no, that can't be because, Christ's kingdom hasn't been set up during a 1,000-year millennial reign. See, there's some contradictions about that millennial reign that we're going to go through. One of the Magog thing that we'll get to, and various things that we'll be talking about. One, though, is the fact that if the kingdom of Jesus that lasts 1,000 years, if that's the case, that kingdom for 1,000 years could not be the fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 35 and chapter 11 and different places where it talks about the lamb lying down with the wolf and the lion eating straw like the bull, and the child playing in the hole of the cobra, and the desert blossoming as the rose. Because you see, that description is the restoration of paradise. Now, you cannot, and I don't know why a lot of individuals like Jehovah's Witnesses, Adventists, and a lot of Protestants that believe this, I'm kind of shocked that we didn't realize that if the earth was going to be restored to paradise, where the nature of the animals is going to be loving and no more death, then we've got to be talking about the end, when Christ returns and sets up his eternal kingdom. When he changes the very nature of this world so that lions don't eat animals, but they eat straw. And that the desert will blossom as the rose. That's got to be an infinite, eternal kingdom. Right? The curse must, at that point, be removed. There's a contradiction then when people like Jehovah's Witnesses and other Protestants say, well, we're going to have 1,000-year reign of Christ, and the desert will blossom like the rose, and the lamb will lie down with the wolf. Well, no, that's not possible. Because if the devil's going to come up out of his prison, out of the bottomless pit, the bees, at the end of the 1,000 years, there'll be another big, great white throne judgment, and still hell that people will be thrown into. Then it says Gog and Magog comes up out of the bottomless pit. The dragon was in prison for 1,000 years, comes back out at the end of 1,000 years, and goes forth to the four corners of the earth to gather them to the great battle. Now, here's one of my proof texts for the reason I'm changing something here in the way I understand the book of Revelation. The great battle. How many great battles are there? The great, like Babylon the Great, right? There's only one Babylon the Great. There was Babylon, then there's Babylon the Great. Well, this is the great battle. And elsewhere it calls it the battle of the great day of God the Almighty. And that happens, according to all the Protestants in the world, before Christ comes to set up his kingdom. So they think that he's going to only set up a kingdom for 1,000 years. So they think that the tribulation comes just before the millennial, and Armageddon comes just before the millennial kingdom of Christ. However, here the great battle happens at the end of the 1,000 years. This, along with other verses like Gog and Magog, which we find in Ezekiel 38 and also in Revelation 20, are both referring to the same event, which we'll get into, which is just before Christ establishes the eternal kingdom, but also at the end of 1,000 years. So what we're having trouble with here is, what is this 1,000 years? Is it the same 1,000 years that Peter talks about, where he's patient with us because he desires all to attain unto repentance? Well, he's saying that Christ doesn't come until after the 1,000 years is over. The return of Christ. See, I'm not a preterist. I have never been, and this new revelation does not change that. But as far as the 1,000 years having already occurred, I think that we're going to have to confess and admit that we were wrong. I think all of the world has never understood this. And in our day, a lot of people coming up with these new ideas, and, maybe at first they're going to get part of it wrong. There's a lot of stuff coming out, conspiracies, and some of it's not really actually quite right. So it's going to depend on a certain group of individuals at this time. I think the Lord's going to have us understand this. And it's funny because it's happening right now that we're understanding, and all this new light is coming, so that not just one little group over here and in this one organization understand it, but the whole world now. It's going to be broadcasted all over the internet. And if this video does not go viral, then shame on all of you, because you will understand what I'm about to say, what I'm going to show you in this video, and you will grasp it. And now it's got to be preached from the housetops, because people have got to understand what's about to happen, friends, because I guarantee we are about to see Christ coming on the clouds of heaven, the true coming of Christ, but it's not the millennial reign. Now, let me go into some of these points, a lot of which we've been sort of having all these revelations in the last, few years. I mean, I've been doing this over 10 years, and I've had a lot of revelations and come to understand a lot about the Bible that I didn't understand growing up. But in the last few months, there's been some big revelations, and really, hasn't been that long. Everybody's talking about this Preterism and the Tartarians and so forth, and we're going to get into that in the coming videos. It's all connected. So we've been talking about all of this, about history and things that we've been talking about. It only reinforces a lot of what we've been saying, so that it now is incontrovertible. But still surprising and shocking and hard to accept. It's like waking up and rising out of bed, and there in front of you is an angel and a choir of other angels singing, and little birds flying down, and trumpets blasting, and you think you're still having a dream. But you rub your eyes and it's real, and you don't know what to say. I mean, you can't even go out and tell anybody this stuff. Like, oh, what happened? I just woke up and there's this angel, and people wouldn't believe you. So what's interesting is that a lot of conspiracies and theories have come along that, strangely enough, though they're not true, have parts of the truth in them. And I think that all of this awakening and wokeism and all these conspiracies and things that we're waking up to, I think is designed by the devil to be confusing. But I think that the devil never would have opened up all these ideas that had been hidden, new information on purpose. Knowledge shall increase in the latter days. That's a fact, Jack. The book of Daniel tells us this. So it is almost as if the knowledge is coming from the Lord, but the only thing that the elite and the devil and his hordes can do to keep us from the knowledge is to deceive. Probably why it says in the book of Revelation, the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, which ought to tell you where the wrath is coming from in the book of Revelation. But at least the kind of wrath that murders and innocent people and so forth, and is unjust and is evil and wicked. And our Heavenly Father doesn't need wrath. I mean, he could snap his fingers and everything would be just the way he would want it to be. No wrath needed. He could have all of his angels come and just whisk the wicked away. I don't even think they need straitjackets, to be honest with you. They could just whisk them away and take them someplace out of the view of all of his saints and all of the people of this earth, so that we didn't have to watch it if it was something that had to be done in that sense. But I don't think that it would need to be done. I think that any intelligent being that has any spark of the divine in it, which every human being has, can be rehabilitated. And we've seen beyond a shadow of a doubt that the book of Revelation that's talking about the eternal fire and torture and torment and so forth is not talking about an eternal fire. But the word there is an age lasting, or a period of time, an appointed time for this suffering to cleanse and purify those who had not yet attained. And we've talked about a lot of different things over the last few months and years. And recently we've talked a little bit about what people are calling Preterism, and the other one that usually goes along with that one is that we're in the little season. And I have said that we are not, that Jesus had not yet come again. I don't believe in Preterism. And the reason for that, because I would certainly love it if Jesus had come and all of us, his saints and his people, were reigning with Christ in heavenly places. I'd much prefer that. But the world that we live in today doesn't lend any credence to that at first glance. Anyway, I'm going to take you through some interesting twists and turns, and I'm going to give you some proofs beyond a doubt. Now, there are lots of people talking about this little season. The problem with their explanation that's having the effect that it is upon Christianity, or as it always has, for the past 2,000 years, nobody really thought that the kingdom of Christ has come already, other than the Catholics, who thought that they were reigning over the earth for 1,000 years. The Catholic Church, or Christ, was reigning, and that the little season now. So they do believe that. And there's a guy out there that's teaching the little season in connection with Tartaria and stuff. But he's not saying anything different, basically. I mean, he's tying it into the Catholic belief that Christ reigned over the earth. Now, I could never accept that. And I'll tell you why. Because I'm not going to just one day wake up and say, okay, the Roman Church is Christ. It's a perversion of Christ. They killed the true Christians. They murdered people, inquisitions and anathemas, paper bulls, martyrdoms, hatefulness, crucifixions, death, destruction, injustice. And the Jesuits and the popes were brutal and evil. There's no way on this earth or in hell or even in heaven that could possibly be true. So if the Catholic Church didn't reign for 1,000 years, then how could we say that Christ reigned for 1,000 years? Well, I got to thinking. No, I got a lot of thoughts, but I don't know which ones to say first. But let's just go with how the Spirit moves me today, because I've got a lot of things to cover and things that I'm just thinking about that the Spirit has been putting on my mind. And I've never put this in video form. So it's going to just come out my mouth as I am able to do it, because we could spend hours on this today. I've got that much information now, most of which we've been talking about, but we're going to put it all together like putting a hand in a glove now so that we really get a feel for this. But so the Catholic Church wasn't the reign of Christ. And in order for this Preterism to be true, and by the way, Preterism means, for those of you who don't know, that Jesus has already come and established his kingdom, which the Bible says will be 1,000 years. So some preterists who haven't gotten deeply into this, I guess, and I don't think anyone has, they don't know the end of the point. They don't understand where they're going with this, right? They'll say, oh yeah, I believe in Preterism for this reason and that reason. But what happens after Christ's return, the setting up and establishing of his kingdom, there's no sign of that. Because a lot of these preterists are not want to start spouting Catholic doctrine and saying, oh yeah, the Catholic Church reigned for 1,000 years. So they don't know what to do. So they say, well, it's spiritual. See, we're reigning now in the spirit, even though the world is wicked. And they say, but look at Revelation chapter 22 says that even at the end of the 1,000 years, at the end of the millennial, there's still wickedness, because Gog and Magog comes out and surrounds the holy city, and there's a great last judgment. So we're not talking about the eternal kingdom of the Lord. Whatever this 1,000 years is, there's still going to be wickedness on the earth. Ordinary Christians, Protestants usually, most everyone else, has said, well, okay, but Christ is going to reign during the 1,000 years. And when he is, there might be a little season where the devil's let loose out of his prison. But that's just a little season. But he will be reigning on the earth, and the lamb shall lie down with the wolf. The lion shall eat straw like the bull. Oh, the desert will blossom as a rose for 1,000 years, and will restore the earth to paradise. It's just that at the end of the 1,000 years, we're going to destroy the whole thing all over again, and there'll be a new heavens and a new earth after we've restored it and we've changed the nature of this world and the animals for 1,000 years. We're going to squash them, and we'll start over again. That don't make any sense, does it? When the Lord does bring back the rose to bloom in the desert, and the lion to have another nature and to eat straw like a bull, it will be permanent. It will be an advancement of our animal nature to a place of peace and paradise. Will be restored forever. You can't go back on that, see? So that's something I hadn't ever understood fully. I never thought of that. Like, what? How could you restore the earth to paradise and then destroy it again? That don't make sense. the beast that comes out of the bottomless pit could easily come out of the pit that he's thrown in during the 1,000 years. And so when the beast comes up out of the bottomless pit for the Great Tribulation, why couldn't that be at the end of the 1,000 years? What if the 1,000 years had ended, but Christ hadn't come yet, in the sense that he comes down to the earth and establishes his eternal kingdom? And the 144,000 are going to be with him, reigning before, but not in the same way as Christ is reigning supreme, and all of his children, and the nature of the beast is now changed to a docile little lamb. And there is no evil, there's no wickedness, there's no bad nations running around, there's never going to be any more war, no more pain, no more tears, no more crying, and no more death. Okay? But during the 1,000 years, there's going to be death, and there will still be suffering, according to that verse. Now, don't worry, we're going to explain this completely. So let me go on to a couple more points, and we'll get back to that. Now, there are two things that had befuddled me in my own understanding of this entire thing for quite a while. And I have to, now that I'm looking back, I realize there are a few things that we have always had problems with in the scriptures that didn't make any sense, but we just moved on because nobody understood it. Odd things that were out of place. We just like, well, that's out of place, but I don't know what to do with that, right? So we'll just move on because there's this scripture and there's that scripture that proves it. So this one contradicts it, so we'll just leave that one alone, but we got this one and that one, right? So people would say, well, it says right there that there's 144,000. They've come off victorious from the beast. And right at the beginning of chapter 20, it says, I saw an angel come down and he took the dragon and he threw him into the bottomless pit and covered it over for 1,000 years. Well, that's logical that you go from this last period of time that we've been going through, what's been about 2,000 years. We have this great tribulation, and all the trumpets and all the vials and the wrath and everything that's going on during the tribulation. And then boom, here comes Christ, and he makes a new heavens and a new earth. But not yet. Because right there in Revelation 20, he says, the angel comes down, yay, we got victory over the beast and so forth, but he's going to bind the devil for 1,000 years. He's going to come out again at the end of the 1,000 years. So after all this 2,000 years, we've got to wait another 1,000 years. So I suppose that in their scenario, the 1,000 years that hasn't happened yet, that's coming now, when they think Christ is coming, really isn't a universal, complete rule of Christ, because regardless of whether you got the 1,000 years in the past or whether it's in the future, either way, it's not absolute victory over the devil, because at the end of the 1,000 years, he comes out of the bottomless pit. And we could do that either way. We could have him come out of the bottomless pit, go down into the pit, and back out of the bottomless pit at the end of the 1,000 years. Or this idea that he went into the pit and comes out is only happening once. And here's another one of these little perplexers. In Revelation chapter 20, where at the beginning of chapter 20 it says, I saw an angel come down from heaven with a key to the bottomless pit and a great chain, and he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. It looks like this is coming after the Great Tribulation. We've just had the whole book of Revelation. Now we're down to the end of the book of Revelation, chapter 20. The plagues and everything's over. All this stuff we've been going through is now over. And Jesus has come in his second return. And the first thing he does is he tells his angels to grab the dragon. Gotcha! Throws him into the bottomless pit for 1,000 years. And then there is this interesting verse when you get down to verse 7 of chapter 20 that says, when the 1,000 years have expired, and they're all finished, then Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners or quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. Okay, so here we got Gog and Magog. Gog and Magog coming up out of the bottomless pit, the hordes of Satan. But if you go to Ezekiel, where it first talks about Gog and Magog, it's talking about the bringing of these, maybe like Russia, people think. I will tell you, and I've told you before, Gog and Magog in history has to do with the Gentiles and the mythology of Poseidon. Poseidon had a child named Magog, and they had these 10 demi-deities. These were Greek deities. So I have said that, and I'm not going to go deeply into this part of it. It's not important, but, it's important, but not at this point in our research. We'll get back to that. But I believe that the 10 Germanic kings, basically the Vikings and the Lombards and the Visigoths and all these Goths, and the Vandals, the thieves, the barbarians around the Isles of the Sea where Poseidon was, and all the way up to Moscow, Mushek, and Rus, Russia. This is the 10 Germanic tribes, who, by the way, in the last, I don't know how many years, have clearly been warring against Tartaria and erasing a lot of things. And we've talked about this whole idea of Tartaria, which is going to fit into this. The point is that in Ezekiel chapter 38, 37, 38, which talks about this, it seems clearly to be referring to just before the reign of Christ. Before Christ's kingdom is established and his people have been destroyed and laying there like just dead man's bones. And there's this restoration of his kingdom and his people. And it clearly, if you read through chapter 38 of Ezekiel, seems to indicate that after this war, then we get the establishing of the kingdom. There is no break in there. There's no 1,000 years in the book of Ezekiel. It just comes after all the wickedness on earth, and then after all the prophecies are fulfilled, Jerusalem lies desolate, and finally, Christ returns to establish and bring back his kingdom and the resurrection. Most people believe that the resurrection occurs like at the beginning of the millennium. Well, here we have Gog and Magog in chapter 20 of Revelation at the end of the 1,000 years, not at the beginning of the 1,000 years. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Ezekiel very clearly, I think, can be proven to be the Gog of Magog there is coming to destroy Jerusalem at the beginning of the 1,000 years. Well, with their understanding, if you think that this Gog of Magog is happening over there and they're going to have a war in Palestine and we haven't had the 1,000 years yet, well, then you would say, okay, Gog of Magog comes at the beginning of the 1,000 years. But Revelation chapter 20 says it's at the end of the 1,000 years. Could there be 2 times that the beast comes out of the bottomless pit? 2 different times when Gog of Magog has this great battle and gathers all the kings to the great battle, the kings of the earth? And 2 times that the beast comes out of the bottomless pit? 2 great judgments? 2 resurrections? This doesn't make sense. This is why everybody's looking over there to Palestine and wondering if Russia is about to destroy Israel and surround it. And it mentions all the kingdoms that's going to surround it. You know, Gog and Magog and Tubal and Egypt and Armenia and Libya and Put and all of these different kingdoms that are going to, which are all definitely following the, like Iran and stuff, are kind of in cahoots with Russia. It seems like they're kind of against the idea of this Palestine. So it fits with that. But now, why would the Bible then use the word Gog and Magog, which the only reference to it would be that we find in Ezekiel 38, which appears to be talking about something that's about to happen in our day, when we're going to have a great tribulation, and there's going to be the beast coming out of the bottomless pit. It seems like the Gog of Magog story happens in our day, not at the end of the 1,000 years, unless the 1,000 years have already happened. Because we know the book of Revelation, everything it says is referencing something in the prophets, right? Daniel references Hosea, it references all of the Isaiah, everything. There's little excerpts out of all the prophets in the book of Revelation. It's kind of harmonizing it and putting all the prophets together in a sense. So he throws in words from Ezekiel here, which we would then automatically hearken back to Ezekiel 38 and say, oh, this is talking about the beginning of the 1,000 years. But wait a minute, it says at the end of the 1,000 years. What if the 1,000 years is not the time when Jesus has established his kingdom on earth? The only reason we believe that this 1,000-year period has anything to do with the kingdom of Christ is a very obscure verse here in Revelation, which we'll read here. But remember, there's other places where this 1,000 years is mentioned other than John in Revelation. The Apostle Peter says, a day unto the Lord like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. How can we not see the reference this 1,000 years has with Peter? And what is Peter speaking of? The kingdom of the Lord for 1,000 years? No. He's talking about a period of time where the Lord is patient and sin remains. And therefore, we're not even at the coming of Christ yet. We're waiting patiently. He's patient with us for all to attain unto repentance. And so there's going to be 1,000 years. And I've said it may refer to 2,000 years there, because he's quoting from Psalms, which says a day and a night, and each of them are 1,000 years. But the idea, and especially as it's written in our King James and so forth, where it talks about this 1,000 years, the Lord is not slow concerning his promise, but patient. So if we link up and reference this word Gog and Magog, we see Ezekiel is talking about the beginning of the Lord's kingdom. Forget the word 1,000 years there. There's no 1,000 years in Ezekiel. It's just whenever Christ comes to establish his kingdom and the resurrection occurs. And Peter talks about the 1,000 years, but says it's before he establishes his kingdom. So then, where do we get the idea that Jesus himself will rule on the earth for 1,000 years? Well, that's here in Revelation 22, in chapter 20. We just read it, where we talked about the 1,000 years. But it says, I saw thrones, and they that sat on them, and judgment was given unto them. Judgment. Is it the final judgment? Well, we always assume that. But it's some judgment. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of deity, which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads. Okay, so at first glance, it really does look like the saints reign for 1,000 years with Christ, we assuming on the earth, and they get this privilege to reign with Christ 1,000 years because they came off victorious from the beast in his image. But look at it again, and it's like a Rubik's Cube. I guess the book of Revelation just does this on purpose. It's not supposed to be revealed right away. It's like a Rubik's Cube. It doesn't actually say that the beast and the image that they overcome is before the millennial. And because they've overcome the beast, then they're privileged to reign with Christ 1,000 years. It looks like it, but it doesn't actually say that. It literally just says that they reign with Christ 1,000 years. And they also overcome the beast in his image, which could be at the beginning or at the end of the 1,000 years. It doesn't say. So yeah, they reign with Christ 1,000 years, and they did overcome the beast in his image. But evidently they do that at the end, after the 1,000 years is over, when the beast comes up out of the bottomless pit. Because the angel came down and had a key and opened the pit and let the dragon and the beast out to go off to gather all the nations for the great war with Magog and Gog to gather them to the great war, which is what? Armageddon, which is supposed to happen before the millennial, but no, it's going to happen after the millennial. And then there will be the eternal kingdom of Christ, and the return of Christ is the eternal kingdom of Christ. We'll show you that. We'll make that very clear. So, where do we get the idea that they'll reign on the earth with Christ for 1,000 years? Literally over and on the earth. Maybe they're going to be reigning in some other way. Well, in Revelation chapter 20, it doesn't say they're going to reign on the earth or over the earth. It says they'll reign with Christ for 1,000 years, but it doesn't say on the earth. Now, the Bible does say that they'll reign on the earth, but not in that place. And where it does say it, in Revelation chapter 5, verse 10, is not talking about the 1,000-year reign. It's literally talking about an eternal reign of Christ on the earth. But during the 1,000 years, not necessarily on the earth. It doesn't say that anyway. So you look at Revelation chapter 5 and start verse 10, and it says, "And hath made us unto our deity kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth." Upon the earth. And verse 11, "And I beheld, and I heard the voice of many angels around about the throne, and the beast, and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000, and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, Worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power, and riches, and wisdom, and strength, and honor, and glory, and blessing, and every creature which is in heaven, and on the earth, and under the earth, and such as are in the sea, and all that are in them heard I saying, Blessing and honor and glory and power be unto him that sitteth upon the throne and to the Lamb forever and ever. So he's on a throne, and he's over not just the earth here, but he's over heaven, and he's over earth, and he's over the sea and everything, and the fountains of waters and everything, and his throne is forever. And we're going to reign with him forever. So what is 1,000 years that we're going to be reigning in association or with him, but for 1,000 years, but not on the earth? Well, this brings us to another verse that I've thought about, I've saw in my head, and I just didn't quite grasp the meaning in that one sentence, and I just kind of moved on. And whenever I've looked at it, I've had a little thought in the back of my mind, but never really explored that thought. And that is that Jesus says, when he goes away, not when he comes again, but when he goes away, he's going to give everybody these talents. And he's going to give one guy 10 talents, another guy 5 talents, another guy 1 talent. These are given to the stewards. And he's going to go away and come back again. When he comes back again, he's going to find out what we've done with our talents. So now, isn't this a little bit like saying that during the time that Jesus is not on the earth, when he leaves, he hadn't come back yet, he's still got stewards on the earth working for him. He's in charge. And we're the stewards working on behalf of Jesus. During the 1,000 years that Peter talked about, perhaps, where we're being patient, because he's not slow respecting his promise, but patient, that all might attain unto repentance. And when he comes again, then he's going to judge the ones that are in control, in power. Some will say, oh, my master's delaying his coming, and begin to beat their fellow servants. Jehovah's Witnesses, anyone who said the Lord's coming, but now they're saying, oh, he's delayed his coming, and now they're beating their fellow servants? I know. But they're just one of the many stewards that are unfaithful today. But Jesus is still in charge. He goes away and he puts certain ones in charge over the domestics, over the money, over the sheep, and over the vineyard, and over the manor. Somebody's placed in charge in association with Jesus under his command. There's lots of little verses like this where Jesus goes away, but is still watching over mankind and is going to return and give everybody a reward. So one scripture that Jehovah's Witnesses are fond of, and they seem to use it pretty predominantly throughout their literature, and it's part of their whole psyche and how they make people believe that they're the truth, is they say there's a prophecy where Jesus says, who really is the faithful and discreet servant or steward, whom his master shall appoint over all his belongings? Well, if he appoints him over all his belongings, he's got authority, power, and that's not going to be taken away from him, right? But there is a period of time where this steward is going to be acting on behalf of Jesus, but not necessarily be an absolute position of eternal reign, but temporarily reigning. So he says, happy is that servant if when I arrive, I find him already doing so. So there's still people during the last 2,000 years on the earth who are in control of the talents, who are stewards, wise stewards. Some of them will be wise, and they will be serving in association with Christ, reigning over the world with the talents that Jesus gave them to reign. If they show love and they make more talents and prosper the kingdom, then Jesus will come and say, good and faithful steward, right? Happy are you. I'm going to appoint you over all my belongings. So when this happens in the parable, we could only assume that once he rewards the steward for being faithful, that steward will then reign forever with Christ. Prior to that, though, he's being given this right to be in charge, right, of the domestics of the kingdom of Christ. It is Christ's kingdom, even if he's not on the earth right now. Jesus isn't on the earth, we assume, right? He's not somewhere in Shambhala or something, on the North Pole or something, but he's going to return. So wherever he's at, wherever that is, he hadn't returned yet. And when he returns, then he'll reward everyone, both the wicked and the righteous. But it's still his kingdom the whole time he's gone. The whole 1,000 years. Were there missing years in our history? Well, we'll get into that. But it's been 2,000 years. So, and of course, you need a whole 1,000 years because immediately after that, he comes. So there's a complete 1,000 years. Like when the 1,000 years have expired. And then there's a little season. So it's more than 1,000 years. It's 1,000 years plus a little season, which we don't know how long that is. So it would be more than 1,000 years that he's gone. And it appears that he returns to take the devil and get rid of him forever and give a reward to everyone. One of the things that I've always wondered about is why would Jesus have two different times of judgment? We know that we're going through a judgment before he sets up his kingdom. Well, then he sets up his kingdom and it only lasts 1,000 years and here comes the devil. Why did they let the devil out of the bottomless pit once we got him down there? I have in the past thought, well, it must be cycles. You know, it keeps coming back up and going back down, and there might be something to that. But in this respect, now I see that this beast that's in the bottomless pit, we only have one reference. Just like we had references before about certain things that we can go back to and see, like Gog and Magog and so forth. And if it's a reference, then it has to be referring to that and not something else. There's only one reference of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38. Well, there's only one reference to a beast being put into a bottomless pit and coming out of the bottomless pit. There's only one reference to that. And that is that during the 1,000 years, the beast is in the bottomless pit. And the beast comes out of the bottomless pit at the end of the 1,000 years. There's only one time that the beast comes up out of the bottomless pit, at the end of the 1,000 years, like Peter says He's not slow respecting his promise, but he's patient. We're waiting for him to arrive 1,000 years down the road. The day of the Lord's like 1,000 years. And when he comes, maybe 1,000 or more years from now, he'll then somehow or another conquer a beast that's coming out of a bottomless pit, let loose for a little season. Now, just because the only thing that it mentions in Revelation chapter 20 and so forth is this little season, we get to thinking, well, then the tribulation, everything's already passed. Well, just because it's not talking specifically about the tribulation at that point, at least we don't think it is, that doesn't mean it's not part of what happens when this beast comes out of the bottomless pit. There's Magog and Gog and all of this. This is fitting quite well. And he's coming out of a bottomless pit. That fits, because that's what happens in Revelation chapter 18, where the beast, chapter 13, where the beast comes up out of the bottomless pit. That's at the end of the 1,000 years. Revelation chapter 13. And here's proof for it, which I am surprised that I didn't notice. I think I did notice it once, and again, I put it behind my little cranial nub and didn't think too much about it again. But it does mention the plagues. Now, in the chapter 16 of Revelation, it says that the final last plagues that are going to be poured out upon mankind in this final judgment. If that's the final judgment, why are we waiting for another judgment at the end of 1,000 years? So the vials, or the bowls of wrath, come down during the tribulation, don't they? Chapter 16. But why do we find the vials and the bowls of wrath all the way down to Revelation chapter 21, verse 9? Now, remember, chapter 21 of Revelation says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. This is at the end of the 1,000 years. An eternal kingdom. No more death, no more crying, no more tears. That's right after the new heavens comes down in verse 1. We got verse 4, where the tears are going to be gone and death will be no more. So we know this is at the end of the 1,000 years. It says so anyway, but it's very clearly that we're talking about he's setting up his eternal kingdom. Death will be no more. And here in verse 7, he that overcometh shall inherit all these things. Overcome what? Well, all these plagues and everything is going on. And verse 8, but the fearful, the unbelieving, the abominable, and the murderers, and the whoremongers, and the sorcerers, and the idolaters, and the liars shall have their part in the lake which burned with fire. Well, wait a minute. The lake which burned with fire was at the end of this age of time that we lead up to the millennial, or whenever he establishes a kingdom. So what are we going to have? Two judgments, the great white throne judgment. It's what the Adventists and even witnesses and people, I think, used to call it that. But how similar is that judgment, where there's a resurrection or something, with the judgment when Christ returns in our day after the tribulation? And there's a resurrection and judgment and a lake of fire that burns up the earth during tribulation. The war of the great day of God the Almighty. But it gets more specific, because verse 9 says, and there came unto me one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials full of the 7 last plagues. And he talked with me, saying, come hither, and I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. Okay, why is he referring or referencing the angel who has the last 7 plagues? Well, didn't they already do the 7 plagues in another chapter, and the end of the world and the tribulation? The beast is already caught, thrown into the lake of fire and all stuff. Now here we are, Revelation 21, no death, no more tears, eternal kingdom of Christ. But here's still an angel with the 7 plagues. See, if you look in Revelation, it's always doing this. Each one of the chapters of the book of Revelation will mention something that seems to have happened in the days of yore. And then all of a sudden it's going into things that happen at the end. And it's almost out of sequence. I mean, not really. It's just very intricately woven like a Rubik's Cube. You got to notice all the verbs and the nouns and everything, and make sure you're getting this all put together straight. So it's like he's saying, he's not hearkening back to a day when a long time ago there were these angels that came and had these plagues. He's mentioning these plagues as though they're the last plagues and they haven't been dropped yet. But he's also saying, by the way, I saw the new city coming down out of heaven. No more death, and all the world is a beautiful paradise. Right? I'm seeing it in vision, but then the angels got the last plagues because I'm just looking at this thing in vision. It hadn't quite happened yet. I'm John, right? I'm 2,000 years ago. But I'm seeing the destruction of the world and the new kingdom of Christ, his eternal kingdom, in the future. And while I'm looking at the new heavens and the new earth coming down out of heaven in this vision, here comes the angel with the last plagues. I think the last plagues are the last judgment at the end of the 1,000 years. And the 1,000 years is not the reign of Christ on the earth. It's simply the reign of his stewards in association with him. Does that mean then that I believe that the Catholic Church are the representation, or the representatives, I should say, of Jesus? Are they reigning in his stead and they're unfaithful? Yeah, they are unfaithful. They were appointed because they're Christians, but they're unfaithful stewards. So who are the faithful stewards? That's where we're going to get into some of the most amazing things that you will have ever heard. And it's funny how all of this stuff is kind of coming out in recent days with all these ideas about Tartaria and so forth. I'm going to show you, we did whole videos about Prester John was supposed to be reigning over in China and India, and then over in Ethiopia, and then in America. And if you look at the old maps from the 16th, 17th, 18th century, the whole world was labeled Tartaria. And the only place that wasn't Tartaria was Europe. And it's funny how when we look back on our history, the only history we're told about, that we know anything about, the world history, is this little area called Europe, right? That's all. These feudal kings that were fighting. And the Vatican. We very rarely even hear about the barbarians, just they're barbarians, whatever they are, you know. We know there were wars and so forth. But isn't it odd that the victors, the one who ruled the world for the last 2,000 years, supposedly the Vatican or Rome or whatever, isn't it odd that the only land that they acquired was Europe? But, you know, I mean, after Christ, remember, Muhammad came in 600 AD. Islamic countries were not ruled over by Rome before 600 AD. Like India and China, they didn't talk about them. They didn't know. The only thing we knew about that was Prester John was out there reigning over that. And he was protecting, he was a knight. By the way, a knight means a priest. It literally means a servant or a priest. And a sire means an elder. And if you were knighted as a priest, then you could become a sir. They gave you the title elder. It was the priesthood. And the first priest that was appointed by Jesus himself. And we're going to find out that these characters in the Arthurian tales, what they call legends, are the truth. Just like the Bible was written symbolically so that it wouldn't be burned and thrown away and we could preserve it. So around the year 1200, right when the 1,000 years of Christ's kingdom was ending and the Languidok, they were murdering them, and in the great Inquisition of the Waldensian Inquisition, they ran them out of the Languidok where Christ and Mary Magdalene set up his kingdom. By the way, why did Jesus choose 12 and 72 also? When we know the 72 is the Sanhedrin that rules the world. Why would Jesus establish a kingdom if that kingdom wasn't going to reign? And we're told, not just in one place, in another here or there, or some myth that doesn't seem like it's true, but everywhere, all we hear, read Dan Brown's book. But there's a lot, René Le Chateau and all of these things that we're going to find out. Why there was a city called Lyons in France, because it's talking about Leo. And Arthur means the bear, Arcturus, which is the guard, who guards what? The bear. And what is the bear? The bear constellation is right there fighting against the dragon, Draco, and Polaris and Cephas, the father's throne, and Cassiopeia are there. And the name of the mother is Cassiopeia in Greek, but in the legend of the Round Table and King Arthur, the divine mother is Guinevere. Guinevere means white. You know, Snow White means white, pure spirit. So they say white ghost or white phantom, but phantom means ghost or spirit. So it's the Holy Spirit. And Arcturus is in the north, reigning and guarding the world. The northern hemisphere up there by Polaris. And the Divine Mother's with him. And all of these characters that you read about, like Lancelot, is the old French word Lancelot means servant. So this faithful priest who was supposed to have this dagger or whatever and be a great warrior, and then there were other ones, Gawain and Percival, and we've said that Percival is a name that refers to Peter Waldo, who owned 169 cities, towns, and villages along the Rhone, because Mary Magdalene came over with her children and the 72 to Marseille, France, and that's where they established a kingdom. And by the way, if you don't think it's an important area, why did the capital of Languidok become Montpellier? It was Montpellier. And the dome on our Capitol building in Washington was designed after Montpellier. Notice that James Madison, who was probably the most important founding father, he was the main guy that drew up the Constitution. He was also the guy that, along with a couple others, that drew up the Bill of Rights, as well as the Federalist Papers, which most people in America don't even know what that is. But the Federalist Papers were James Madison and a couple of other individuals who drew it up to explain what the Constitution of America is and what freedom is and what we really believe and what we were supposed to be, what they've made these Constitution Bill of Rights for. So it was explaining what America is, the Federalist Papers, and they use this. You've probably seen certain lawyers when Trump was becoming, running for president and stuff. They were talking about what was the intention of the Constitution, and they had to read the Federalist Papers to find out. And of course, a lot of liberals and Democrats are like, oh, we don't believe in the Federalist Papers. That was just some guy. Yeah, just some guy. James Madison, one of the most important people and the most important founders of this country. And by the way, he lived in a building, his home, called Montpellier. Why is that important? Because Montpellier is the capital of the Languedoc, where Mary Magdalene and Lazarus and the 72, the kingdom of Christ that he chose, the Sanhedrin, to rule over the world. They ruled the world from Montpellier, which is why also in Vermont, they call that capital of Vermont, Montpellier. And it's funny, I spent 2 or 3 years when I was a kid in a little town in Idaho called Montpellier. Now, that's neither here nor there, but it's interesting for me because it's an important word from my youth, and I don't know, I believe in synchronicities and things like that. So maybe the Lord was trying to show me something even then. But Montpellier is a beautiful, beautiful thought. And it tells you that the founders of this country, this nation, were Huguenots from France. And they revered Mary Magdalene. And this is why they called it Maryland and all of this area. But all of this has been eradicated from our minds and our memories. But as we were saying, the Languidok then reigned, and they were reigning in conjunction with Islamic peoples. And before Muhammad, the world that was then the Persian peoples and India and Africa, America, China, it was all Tartaria. Tartaria is where we get the Liberty Cap. And when this is why we know that Chalago, whoever built it, was a Tartarian. And not that we understand what Tartaria means for sure, although some have said that it just is Rome building a map and saying, okay, this is Rome, and everything else that's not Rome is Tartaria, because it just meant something like, they called the western ones Barbaria, and the eastern ones Tartaria, which just meant the east and the west area from Rome. They didn't know the names of the countries, they just called them the east and the west. I don't know if I agree with that, or I'll do more research into that. I think that they didn't know too much about, or were hiding who these people were that ruled the whole world. Other than Rome, which is just Europe, basically, sometimes they would make little excursions up into the Middle East and stuff, but they didn't have control of Palestine, right? That's why right at the time that the Waldensian Inquisition was going on and they were murdering Peter Waldo, or Percival, the subject of the romance novels, which is about King Arthur, who's not Welsh, but from Britain. And why? Because they're fleeing the Languidok. You ever heard of Avalon? This is the great city of King Arthur and the Round Table. Avalon is a city in France. It harkens back to the days of when there was a kingdom that did not abide by the kingdom of Rome. So about 1150, somewhere in there, they had the Waldensian, 1180 or whatever, they did the Waldensian Inquisition and pushed them out. And around that time, they start writing these Arthurian novels. And most people think they originated from the Welsh or Britain. But actually, Breton is not in Britain. Brittany, or Breton, is northern France, where they pushed them out. And they went to Wales. So King Arthur, when we get the story, is the legends of how they're going up into the areas of Ireland and Scotland and Britain, and they're fleeing. But their history was from France. And so a lot of the novels, the Romance language that it was written in is the language of the Languidok. And by the way, Languidok means the language of yes. I know. And that was the first language that the Bible was translated into by Peter Waldo from the original Septuagint Greek. And from that point on, when they were driven out, they were being exterminated, they put it all down in writing in a novel form or in a romance parabolic form to document or keep a record of the fact that these were the holy knights of the priesthood of Jesus Christ. They were Christians. One of the first people to write this story was this Christian Tories. Christian, he was a Christian from France. And most of the Arthurian legends were written in the old French language, which is a Romance language. There were others that were written later on as they were going up into the Welsh areas and the Breton area. Then they continued on up there. They were being driven out. And if you look to the northwest corner of France in the 15th century, or any time back in there, you'll see the whole thing's called America. It was called the American Peninsula, America. And then right off the coast is Plymouth Rock. And one of the cities there is Lyon. Again, they're using this word Leon a lot because it's in the Arthurian legends about the guy who owned the round table to start with. They gave it to the Arthur because the guy who originally had the round table was Leo, right? He was the ruler of the astrological wheel. But Plymouth Rock is up there, America, the name America, and that's even where we get the word Jersey, right? Right by New York, Jersey, because this is where the Huguenots and other French people from the Languidok was persecuted and ran out. This is King Arthur and the Round Table that made their way up through there. He was the king of this realm when they were being driven out. And so they left from Plymouth Rock, and when they got to America, they called it Plymouth Rock and America and all these other things. This is the true reason why our country has these names, and Maryland and all the things that we've talked about. So, King Louis I think 14th or something, or 15th or 16th, I'm not sure, was beheaded because he had some lineage back to the area of the Languedoc, but they persecuted these individuals all the way down from that time all the way to the Huguenots, who were then finally pushed completely out of France. And I think from that point on, France was conquered by the 10 Germanic tribes by that time. But we were already over here, and we had made the Constitution, the Huguenots. George Washington was a Huguenot. And Massachusetts and Boston and New York and all was full of these Huguenots. Well, there had been French refugees for hundreds of years been coming over here. That's why they built Shalaga and so forth. And the reset was to get rid of the knowledge of the truth that Prester John and what the story calls Lancelot and Percival and King Arthur and Guinevere and Gawain. Camelot is the castle where, now people say, well, Camelot, wasn't that somewhere up in Britain? No, we don't know where Camelot is. But it's a big castle, and it probably was in Avalon, and Avalon's in France. And this whole thing is about the Languedoc. It's about Mary Magdalene. It's about the princess. It's about Snow White and the Excalibur, which means, I think is where we get the word, what caliber of rifle. It's the strength of the bullet. And so Excalibur was a sword that was given by the lady of the lake that had her hand sticking up with a sword that was given to King Arthur. King Arthur was a descendant of the Uther Pendragon. But the whole story is a spiritual story, like the Bible. And so there was this sword that was stuck in some iron, I don't know if it was an anvil or what, some kind of a massive piece of iron that was somehow stuck in this big, huge, massive piece of iron, I think. And nobody could pull out the sword. But the one who could, and all the knights would try their hand to get the sword out of the rock. And nobody could do it. But only the one destined would come along and be able to pull it out. And of course, that was King Arthur, who was the son of Uther Pendragon, which they hadn't told King Arthur that he was from that lineage. His adopted family didn't ever tell him. So it was a surprise. It was like a miracle. And he was this, kind of like, Cinderella and the glass slipper. He was the one that was chosen to pull out the sword. And then, of course, from that point forward, there's a lot about these swords and magical swords, but it's the sword of truth. And nobody could marry Snow White or the princess until whoever it was that could pull out the sword of truth. It would happen one day when it was destined to happen. Somebody was going to come along, and the real knight or servant or priest of the Lord, like Prester, priest, John, would be the one at the end of days. It would finally come along and be able to pull out the sword of truth or acquire the truth for the world, to establish the truth in the world. And that then would have something to do with the marriage of the prince and the princess, which is the great wedding of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. So there's a lot about that we're going to go into in the future here. And there's a lot, and it's so amazing. And it will tell you and clarify and confirm all the truth that we need to know. It's amazing. We'll get into that, but right now we're way over an hour. We gotta bring this to a close. This is probably gonna take, I don't know how many videos. Maybe for the next week or so, we're gonna just be talking about this in detail in most of the videos we're gonna be doing, because I have got a revelation that I can't get into this 1 hour here. I want to share with you that the world wasn't ruled by Rome. It's a big lie. Rome is the false prophet and the beast that is now ruling over the world just before Christ comes at the end of the 1,000 years of his patience. So they didn't rule the world for the last 2,000 years, the beast. They rule at the end. So the reset that we've seen with the Tartarian reset thing, what that is, it appears that there was a vast kingdom that was ruling perhaps over the entire world. China, India, Africa, America. And they were the rulers of the world. But we don't have any of their history. It's been deleted. Well, that's why they started writing the Arthurian romance novels, because those were the history of the descendants of the Knights of the Round Table that we also call the Knights of St. John. And the Knights of the Round Table were a priesthood. That's what the word knight means. And sire, sir, you get the name or title sir, means you become a priest and you're an elder. And they were there to protect the Holy Grail or the Holy Blood. And I believe that the reason we have Jesus being born and having children is because the seed of Christ was scattered throughout the entire world. And there's something special about the seed. I think it's something to do with the adoption. And what Hosea says is, I'm going to plant them like seed into all the world, and they'll grow up. And where it was said, you're not my children, there it shall be the children of the living deity. But we'll go into all of that. There's so much that we're going to find out. It's going to blow your living mind. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there because we're over an hour. I mean, I feel like I'm stopping right in mid-sentence. There's so much more I want to tell you, but I'll do it in the next video, and we'll try to get to you again tomorrow. I have a lot to do around here, and so there might be days where I won't be able to get a video done because I've got so many things I've got to do. And today I had a little time too because it snowed again. But hope you guys have a wonderful evening. The Lord will bless you, and may his grace and peace be with you. We'll see you tomorrow, and have a good one.